Hi there, good morning and welcome. We're going to take about 2 more minutes and let everybody get logged in, and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining. Okay, hi, welcome, and thank you for joining us to take an inside look at the May 2026 Policy Update Packet. My name is Dustin, and this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the webinar and slides will be sent to you shortly after this webinar. So first, I want to give you a brief overview of our agenda. Next slide, please, Josh. We're going to do a little quick housekeeping and introductions, then a couple fun polls, have Ray give us a gamut overview, then we'll dive more deeply into the policy updates for May, have a quick evaluation poll, and then if there's time at the end for additional questions, we'll be glad to take those. Next slide, please, Josh. As many of you probably know, we rely on the Q&A feature for questions, so please type your questions in that. The chat feature is turned off. Those questions will either be answered in writing in the Q&A feature or live by our presenters. And once again, all attendees will receive a link to the video of this webinar as well as the slide deck. Next slide, please. I am Dustin Bindreiff. We're also joined today by Barbara Laifman, Meghan Russell, Ray Purscell, Kristen Lindgren-Brazzoni, and Joshua Daniels. Next slide, please. This is just a quick practice poll to make sure everybody knows how to use the poll function. Our first poll, what is your favorite summer fruit? Berries, stone fruits, grapes, melons, or all fruit as long as it's mixed with ice cream? I'll give you a little time here to answer. Okay, Josh, maybe we can give them a couple more seconds and then share the results. Okay, we're ready for the results, I think, Josh. Oh, goodness. Berries and stone fruits. I was pretty sure the ice cream was a safe bet. But thank you, Josh. Next slide, please. Um, in order just for ourselves and to be aware and improve, make sure we're in tune with our audience. If you guys could take a moment and let us know if you previously attended one of our webinars and what is your role with your district or COE. Okay, a few more seconds and then maybe we'll share the results. Okay, I think we're ready, Josh, whenever you are. Here they come. Oh, great. Once again, we have a strong 26%. This is their first one. And then a lot of returners. And once again, a strong representative of assistants. So real quick, we often at the start have some similar foundational slides we like to cover, but I'm going to try to go pretty quickly over those just to accommodate those people that have been here before. If you, as a new person or even as a returning person, have questions about your policies, feel free to reach out to policy@csba.org and we'll be glad to answer your questions. Next slide, please. And Ray, I'll turn it over to Ray. He'll tell you a little bit about Gamut.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. There are a couple of different ways to access the CSBA update packets. Whether your LEA has access to Gamut Policy Plus or just Gamut Policy, we will look at where to find those update packets in the couple different sites. As well, the update packets are separated between the district policies and the COE policies, so we will look at where those both are. With this slide here, we can see the view from the Gamut policy site, which will be for those districts with just the Gamut policy subscription. To get to this area on the policy site, first you will log in. Then you will see the policies drop-down menu here, and from this drop-down, you will select policy updates. Then on the left sidebar there, you can see the update packets are sorted in chronological order by year on the left. On the screen, we can see the guide sheets and update packets. You are free to click into those documents that you are looking for at the moment. Next slide, please. Thank you. For the COEs that are logging into the Gamut policy site, your view will be slightly different. You will see the county update packets. The process to get to these packets is the same, however. You will sign in and then use the policies drop-down menu to select policy updates, and then make sure that you are clicked into the correct year on the left and locate the specific packet and document that you are looking for. Next slide, please. So Gamut Policy Plus, if your LEA has a subscription to Gamut Policy Plus, then you will still use the policies dropdown on your Gamut site, but here you will select CSBA Communications, and we can see on this screenshot that once you are clicked into this page, you will want to be clicked into the CSBA Policy Updates tab on the left, and then you can see the update packets to the right organized by month and year with the most recent on top. To get into that update packet, just click on the title and you will enter the update packet, which has all of the updated policies and all of the supporting documents that accompany the packet, such as the guide sheet, checklist, and mandated list. This page also has the Copy All Documents button, which allows you to pull the whole packet of sample policies into your work in progress area as drafts ready for editing. Next slide, please. For COEs with Gamut Policy Plus, the process will be largely the same, except you will notice on the left there, it says County Office of Education Policy Updates, and this is where those packets exist for COEs. The district and COE update packets do come out on different dates. Often the COE update packets will come out approximately 1 week after the district update packets. All LEA's designated Gamut contacts will receive an email when their policy update type is posted on Gamut. Next slide, please. The Gamut Spring webinar series is currently wrapping up with the last webinar of the series being held tomorrow, May 28th. If you're interested in registering for this webinar, you can visit csba.org/webinars or look for a link in the chat. If you're interested in the recordings for any of our previous Gamut webinars, please reach out to us at gamut@csba.org. Next slide, please. We host weekly drop-in sessions every Wednesday at 2 p.m. where subscribers can ask our Gamut support team technical questions and receive live assistance. You may register to join one of these sessions at csba.org/webinars. Next slide, please. If you find that your LEA is behind on the updates to your manual, we have a couple of different options to support you in getting caught up. We offer a policy manual review and a policy development workshop. The policy manual review is an audit where our policy team will issue you a report of which policies need updating based on CSBA's most recent updates of those policies. The policy development workshop is a more intensive process where one of our policy manual consultants will travel to your LEA and work with your team to go through and develop your board policy manual so that it is fully updated and customized to fit the needs of your organization. Next slide, please. Gamut offers Policy Plus, but we also offer Gamut Meetings, which is a module that can slot right into your existing Gamut Policy Plus site and allow organizations to build and manage their board meeting agendas within just the one Gamut site. There's also cohesion between the Gamut Policy Plus module and the Gamut Meetings module that allows you to easily pull current and draft policies into your board meeting agendas for review. There are many other features in the Meetings module as well, but the one other feature that speaks to the connection between the Meetings and the Policies module is the search feature that allows you to search through your organization's all of the organization's data, including all of your agendas and the whole board policy manual, all with one search, as it's all stored in the same site. Next slide, please. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Okay, I just want to quickly go over a few of the sample policy basics. These are some foundational things to know about policies to share for your district. Again, we've done these a number of times, so I'm going to probably go pretty quickly. But if you as a board member or first-time attendee have any questions, feel free to reach out to policy@csba.org. Okay, the first thing is foundationally, board policies are the way the board legislates for the district. Our policies are meant to be samples and a resource for you guys to customize and fit your district's needs. Then superintendent implements board policies by the way of administrative regulations, and those are intended to add necessary details that are in alignment with applicable board policies. We also have a few exhibits, and board bylaws are how the board governs themselves. In general, when we say policy, we are referring to all four of these in an inclusive manner. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, our policies are samples, and they are meant to be a starting point for you and your district or COE to customize to fit the unique needs and priorities of your district. These sample policies have gone through extensive legal review, but they aren't legal advice and may quickly become outdated. The notes in the policies can be an important resource that provide context and additional guidance. So please, when you're updating your policies, feel free to look at those notes and make any changes. Next slide, please. As you can see here, we have a number of policies, over 500 sample policies and over 800 documents. So we have a numbering system of general themes that we use to try to organize those and help districts and county offices have a coherent organization to their policies and regulations. Next slide, please. We did want to take a minute and share with you a couple documents that are included in the packet Ray mentioned. The guide sheet can be a useful feature that summarizes all of the policies that have been revised in that packet and a quick summary of what was changed in the packet. So that's a great summary document to start your review of the update packet and to begin planning what policies you and your board may want to look at more closely. Next slide, please. The next important document that's always included in those update packets is the mandate list. This list is a list of policies that are required for districts and county offices to be adopted on specified topic. In this, we include the mandated policies as well as the conditionally mandated policies. A quick example of a conditionally mandated policy would be if you have a school that receives Title I funds, there may be policies that have to be adopted as a part of the condition of receiving Title I funds. So in this example, non-Title I schools would not need to adopt those, but those that are Title I would need to. And you can see a quick example on the side there a little bit. We try to include some information of what is mandated and what is the code section that requires that mandate. And again, that resource is included in each update packet. Next slide, please. Okay, as we dive into our May updates, just one more quick reminder, you will receive a copy of the slides and the webinar shortly after this webinar is completed. Next slide, please. For the May packet, we wanted to touch on four main themes that we'll go into more detail about. The first, well, one of those being student safety and employee misconduct. As you can see here, a number of changes related to SB 848. Next slide, please. Also, some important updates related to weather safety, student disturbances, and the division of governance responsibilities that we wanted to dive more deeply into in this webinar. Next slide, please. We won't have time today to go over these policies, but we did make some slides summarizing the changes so you can access those following the webinar. And again, the guide sheet is also a great resource to see the summary to these slides that we won't have time to go over in detail today. So next slide, please. And I'm going to first go over weather safety, where this is where we removed sun safety and we added weather safety. And I'll talk more about that with the next slide, please. There's been a number of extreme weather conditions that have impacted schools in recent years. And as a result of that, the SB 1248 in 2024 established uniform guidelines and requirements to protect students when doing physical activity during extreme weather conditions. So what we did with this related to SB 1248 was we deleted SB or Board Policy 5141.7, sun safety, and we created 5141.75, the more inclusive term of weather safety. In essence, what 5141.75 does is it incorporates sun safety and adds the updated requirements from SB 1248 that I will go over with the next slide. Next slide. There you go, Josh. Thank you. So SB 1248, weather safety. Became a mandated that LEAs by July 1 develop, adopt, and implement weather protocols for extreme weather conditions. And these protocols will need to incorporate the standardized guidelines compiled by the CDE. These protocols require specific measures to be taken during extreme weather conditions, and it's required that these protocols are annually reviewed, evaluated, and updated. And much of those protocols, the details of those that your district is going to want to look closely at, will be connected to the CDE guidelines and customizing those to fit your district. Next slide, please. So are there any questions about weather safety or sun safety that Barbara and I can try to answer?
I don't see any, Dustin, at this point. If anybody does have questions, though, feel free to put them into the Q&A, and we will have a Q&A at the very end of the webinar, so we could also address it then. So since I don't see any questions right now, why don't we just keep moving forward with our slide deck and our presentation, and
Thank you,
we
Barbara.
will sure, and we'll address at the end. Thanks, Dustin, for the introduction and what you presented so far. Okay, so next slide, please.
Actually,
Actually,
Barbara, one
before,
quick,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I
one quick
just saw
question
that.
did come in.
So we did just see one question come in. How do you agendize deletions of policies? So when I was a school board member, what we would do is we would basically do the same thing as adopting it. So we would put it on the agenda in the section where we did our policies, which we did policies at the end of each meeting. And we basically adopted the deletion. So we would put it in as deleted. We would make a motion to delete the policy. All the board members would vote, and then it would be deleted. Josh, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that explanation.
I think that was good. I would just add that given the connection between these two policies, I would make sure that the addition and the deletion are on the same agenda. Some boards might act as one vote, right, to add and delete, and others might act separately. One act is to delete, one act is to add. Depending upon the topic, some boards have done it under consent. As Barbara mentioned, some boards are at the end of the meeting. It sort of depends on the style and governance processes of your school board.
And that's a very good point to do it together. Yeah. And especially if you're going to make changes to the new one, if you're going to kind of, make it unique for your district or county office, then I would definitely not have it in the consent agenda, to put it on as an action item. Okay, next slide, please.
So there are actually a few more questions coming in.
Oh, okay, okay. I don't see him
Let me
yet.
just, yeah, let me just add
Yeah,
them.
sure.
Okay.
Okay, so why don't I get started with this one? Is there a sample board policy on weather safety that will be shared? Yes, it's the one that that Dustin just spoke about. It's 5141.75 weather safety, which does incorporate what was in sun safety. And it did come out with the May packet, so your district or county office should have that. Next question. Do you need a first reading and a second reading for a deletion? Of course, with the ability to waive second reading. Actually, for all policies, even for adoptions, you don't have to have a second reading. We always recommend that it's a good idea. But no, with a deletion, you do not need a second reading. Just looking if anything. Okay, some of these updates require adoption by July 1, but what if we do not have time to review and get these to the board, given that it's almost June? I would just recommend for any of the ones that have dates to do it at the earliest time you can. So, maybe to agendize it for your August meeting then.
And
Yeah.
there's a couple of things on that. So one is this is actually why we switched to the May release versus the June release because we wanted to give people more time, ideally, before. But if you have one meeting a month and it's early June, that might be tough. The other piece is some boards have policies that delegate authority to act on behalf of the board sort of temporarily during summer recess. So depending upon how that is worded, arguably you could take the position that we've adopted this new policy as of July 1, pending board ratification at the first meeting in, say, August. Again, you do have to talk to your council about that, look at your own board policy to that effect or board bylaw in this situation, but there are some districts that do that delegation during a break of 30 days or more, or 45 days, depending. So take a look at that, and that might be of use for you over the summer.
Okay. Do we see any more questions coming in on weather safety or sun safety?
We
If
do, but
not,
I'll answer them by typing, so we can move on.
sure. Okay, sounds great. So when you're ready for the next slide. Okay, so Megan and I are going to be talking a bit about student safety and employee misconduct, which was really guided by SB 848, or I should say our changes to policy were really guided mostly by SB 848. Next slide, please. And we'll talk first a little bit about some foundational considerations and principles. One, probably pretty obvious, is the importance of schools being a safe environment for students to learn. And then we also recognize that prospective employing districts being provided with information about prospective employees' previous misconduct is very important. For a district or county office to know who's going to be coming in and what more information they can gather about that employee's conduct or really misconduct prior to hiring. We also know that adults who interact with students, it's important for those adults to have appropriate training, including required mandated reporter training, which has been expanded to include volunteers, as well as establishing and maintaining professional boundaries is very important to a school climate. So when looking through SB 848 and our policies, we really found that they are really broken up into kind of three main categories. So we're going to talk about them in this way. The one is hiring requirements, two is the mandated reporter requirements, and three are the professional boundaries. I'm going to talk about the hiring, the first part, and Meghan is going to take the last two topics. Next slide, please. We thought it would be important and probably easiest to understand, since there's so many policies this impacts, is that SB 848 impacts, to kind of just summarize the law before going into the policies. So in terms of the hiring requirements, SB 848 basically has an inquiry part to it, as well as a disclosure part to it. So the inquiry part is a little bit what I had already spoke about. We'll go a little bit more depth. That when a district or county office of education is going to be hiring a new employee, that the little inquiry needs to be done into whether the applicant was the subject of credible complaints of or substantiated investigations into discipline or discipline for egregious misconduct. And in terms of certificated position, this would be conduct that was required to be reported to CTC, the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. And for a classified position, this would be conduct that was used to support a substantiated investigation. Now, in terms of the disclosure requirement, so if you had an employee and then another district or county office of education came to you and asked, about the employee's previous misconduct, you, as a district or county office, would then need to disclose to the LEA or private school considering hiring that applicant the fact that a report of egregious misconduct was made to CTC. And the reason I say CTC here is, and it gets a little confusing because normally we think of CTC as only applicable to certificated staff, but CTC, pending proper funding from the state, is going to be creating a database that will also include misconduct of classified employees. And it will be a database that districts and county offices can access, as well as a responsibility to supply information to. As far as we can see, that's not set up yet, but that's why it's in the law, and that's why that is there, and that general reference to CTC for both classified and certificated positions. Okay, next slide, please. In terms of mandated reporter requirements, the definition of mandated reporter was expanded to include volunteers and board members, so that's really important to know. And there's also additions to the annual mandated reporter training for volunteers and certain requirements that need to be met. There already were training requirements, but that has been added to, as well as who it applies to. In terms of professional boundaries, by July 1, 2026, there are policy requirements for districts and county offices of education. The first one is written policies basically about professional boundaries between different groups of people. It's listed here in the bullet, and establishing appropriate limits on contact. And then the second one talks about policies, plans, or specifications regarding facilities. And it really relates to environments to promote safe environments for learning and engagement that are easily supervised. Next slide, please. So in terms of policy, we'll get started with recruitment and selection, which is a triple coded policy. And this is where the bulk of our SB 848 material is in. And then we incorporate by reference to SB 848 in terms of the hiring procedures that I'm speaking about. We incorporate by reference into this policy to incorporate that information. So the policy was updated to clarify material related to recruitment and selection processes, job announcements, and hiring procedures, and also to reflect the prohibition against requiring an applicant to have a driver's license. And there's a couple exceptions if the driving is an essential function of the position or it is otherwise reasonably expected for driving to be a job function, and satisfying this function using an alternative form of transportation would not be comparable in travel time or cost. So that was just kind of like an aside statute that we added as we were doing our update. Okay, next slide, please. So here is where we talk about that the policy has been updated to reflect SB 848. I really don't need to go into it because we talked about that at the beginning, basically the duty to inquire as well as the duty to disclose. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, in terms of AR 4112 appointment and conditions of employment, the regulation was updated to reference and recognize the California Supreme Court case, which held that a district could be vicariously liable for the negligence of administrators and supervisors in the hiring, retention, and supervision of a counselor who sexually harassed and or abused a student. And as I spoke about before, the bulk of our information about the hiring and SB 848 is in recruitment and selection. So we incorporate that by reference into AR 4112. All right, next slide, please. So in terms of the regulation, we did update this regulation to reference SB 521. And this is really particularly important for county offices of education, which provides that a public employee be disqualified for 5 years from public employment if convicted of a felony arising directly out of official duties as a public employee involving any of the following, which are listed: accepting or giving or offering to give any bribe, a conflict of interest, embezzlement of public money, extortion or theft of public money, perjury, or conspiracy to commit any of the above. And so you might be looking at the last bullet where we say it's only for COEs that elect rather than appoint a county superintendent. And the reason why lies in the definition of public employee, which is basically an employee that would be hired to provide services to an elected official. I think the statute actually says elected public officer, but same idea. So that's why county offices of education where a county superintendent would be appointed, this would not be applicable. Next slide, please. So for 212, appointment and conditions of employment, same changes that we made to 4112. You might get a little confused because it has the same title, but please know, and this is why we have a separate slide, these are not double coded. These are separate policy regulations, I should say, with separate verbiage and language in it. And the reason why is one is specific to classified staff, which is the 4212, and the 4112 is specific to certificated staff. So important to know that these really are two separate regulations, but the changes that we needed to make were consistent in each. Okay, next slide, please. So we'll take a little bit of a look at the regulation and exhibit to criminal record check. So the regulation was updated to reference SB 521, which we just talked about, and really applicable for county offices of education that elect rather than appoint a county superintendent. We do also reflect SB 848, and again, incorporated by reference to recruitment and selection. We did add a section on egregious conduct inquiries, which includes the requirement to disclose, like we talked about, any report made to CTC of egregious misconduct. And so the exhibit's interesting. We had this exhibit for quite a while, but recently, or since our last update, the Attorney General's office has revised and now has a more current employee statement form, which is called Conditions for Release of Criminal Offender Record Information. And we now have that as our exhibit for the districts and county offices to use as a tool in their implementation. Okay, next slide, please. And I think, yes, we are on to administrative regulation called personnel files. And we did update the regulation to expand it to include former employees. It had previously really just focused on current employees. And based on law and our general feeling, since former employees do try to access or need to access sometimes personnel files, the need to include former employees. We did add AB 495, which prohibits staff to the extent practicable from disclosing or providing most personnel records to immigration and officers or employee, and incorporate by reference 1445, response to immigration enforcement. And as you all know, since we have a lot of repeat attendees, BPAR 1445 is where we really have the large majority of our response to immigration enforcement material. We did also include in the regulation SB 513, which clarifies that personnel records relating to an employee's or former employee's performance include education and training records. And SB 513 also requires districts and county offices of education that maintain education and training records to ensure that the records include specified information unless covered by a valid collective bargaining agreement, which expressly provides for certain specified items. And again, we added SB 848 and included a section on egregious conduct inquiries, which includes the requirement to disclose that we had talked about. All right, next slide, please. All right, great. Well, I'm now going to introduce Meghan, who's going to talk about the next two sections of this or topics of SB 848 and our policy changes that we talked about at the beginning.
Thanks, Barbara. So as part of this packet, we updated Board Policy and Administrative Regulation 1240, which deals with volunteer assistance. The policy was updated to align the list of characteristics for which harassment of volunteers is prohibited by law. And we also updated it to reflect SB 848, which we've been talking about a lot in this section. So SB 848 added volunteers to the list of who is considered to be a mandated reporter. And it defined volunteers as a person who is 18 years of age or older and who interacts with students outside of the immediate supervision and control of the student's parent or guardian or school employee. So that's the definition of a volunteer, and somebody who is now required to receive notification, mandated reporter training, and is subject to reporting requirements. And I did see a question in the chat there asking about whether the volunteers have a minimum number of hours that they're required to volunteer in order to be subject to this requirement. And there's no minimum volunteer hour requirements. But what is in the statute is that volunteer is 18 years of age or older, and that they interact with the student outside of the immediate supervision and control of the parent guardian or a school employee. So if the volunteer is only going to be in the classroom when the teacher is there, then they would not be subject to these requirements. And so the regulation was also updated in conjunction with the accompanying board policy. Next slide, please. So we also updated Board Policy and Administrative Regulation 5141.1, which is the Child Abuse Prevention and Reporting Policy. And that was updated to reflect that the superintendent is permitted to collaborate with a variety of organizations on the intervention programs for students. And we're talking more about SB 848, and that authorizes student instruction, and that deals with child abuse, including sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention, and instruction on sexual assault. And then we also clarified that parents and guardians have the right to excuse their student from all or part of this instruction that deals with abuse prevention, including training on sexual abuse and human trafficking. The policy was also updated to reflect a new requirement that if a district provides student ID cards to students in grades 7 through 12, that they are required to have certain numbers or ways to contact printed on them, and those include the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and the new part is that it is also required to have the Trevor Project's LGBTQ suicide hotline printed on them. And then you may also have the county mental health QR code or a QR code that links to the county mental health resources also printed on those student ID cards. So if your district serves students in grades 7 through 12 and you have a student ID card, you're going to need to make sure that on the back of those student ID cards there are these numbers and contacts printed on those when you issue the new cards. Next slide, please. So the regulation was also updated to reflect SB 848. And so the new definition of mandated reporter also includes a governing board member and a volunteer. And it requires volunteers be provided with mandated reporter training within 6 weeks of commencing their volunteer services. And then it adds additional specific training and notice requirements for these mandated reporters. Next slide, please. So board policy 5142 for safety was also updated, and this is dealing with the component of SB 848 that is discusses professional boundaries. So this policy was updated. We added a philosophical statement that recognizes the importance of student engagement and the safe use of technology in order to have a safe school environment. And then we also added certain provisions to reflect the requirements of SB 848. And this does have a requirement for districts to and COEs to adopt by July 1st, 2026, policies that promote safe environments for student learning engagement with specified components related to professional boundaries and policies, plans, or specifications regarding facilities that address classroom and non-classroom environments to promote safe environments for learning and engagements that are easily supervised. Next slide, please. The administrative regulation was updated to reflect AB 727, and that's what we talked about regarding the student ID cards. We also updated the AR to clarify that the superintendent may permit students to avoid overexposure to sun and extreme weather conditions in accordance with the new BP 5141.75 weather safety. And then there's also some language regarding weather and sun exposure in BPAR 6142.7 physical education and activity as well. And we also added material related to personal transportation devices. So that was a new term, and that includes e-bikes and e-scooters. And we added language to this section noting that if you were to adopt this policy and then language provided that personal transportation devices would not be permitted on campus if they do not meet legal standards, that they are not permitted to ride, students are not permitted to ride personal transportation devices on campus during the school day, and that they must be walked to designated parking areas and secured while on campus. Next slide, please. We also updated board policy 7110, which is the facilities master plan. And we clarified in the philosophical statement that long-range planning is important for carrying out vision, mission, and goals of the district. And then this policy was updated to reflect the requirements of SB 848 regarding that the board adopt written policies, plans, or specifications for design and construction of school facilities, including furnishing of the facilities that promote safe environments for learning and student engagement. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think we can move on to questions about this section.
Yes, so thanks, Meghan. So the first question is, what is a triple coded policy? And I think that kind of came up in one of mine, or I shouldn't say mine, one that I presented on. So triple coded, so when Dustin showed the numbering system, you might have noticed that there were the 4000s. Within the 4000s, there's 4100s, 4200s, and 4300s. The 4100s are for certificated staff, the 4200s are for classified staff, and the 4300s are for managerial, excuse me, or supervisory staff. Excuse me. Sometimes we can have one policy that serves all three classes of staff, and we call that triple coded. Sometimes it can cover two of the classes of staff. That's called double coded. And sometimes we need a separate policy for each one because the law and language is so different for each class of employees. So I hope that explains it enough. If not, feel free to reach out after the webinar and we can go more in depth about the explanation. Okay. Next question says, are we allowed to share information on a candidate when they apply to community college? Same spirit of the policy with a question mark. So I think the question is, can you share, if I'm interpreting it right, about a candidate for county superintendent? My understanding, but I would like Josh's input, and what I know based on district law is that you can provide information, but you cannot campaign. There's a prohibition against using resources to campaign. So like,
So
it's
Barbara, I think
education. Yeah.
this is the question about um, upon inquiry disclosing any past allegations or that it was in that
Oh,
context.
got it. I thought it was about AB 521. Okay, okay.
No, SB 848,
Um,
I'm pretty sure.
okay. I'm assuming it would, yes. I mean, it applies to county offices of education, so I would assume it would apply to that. But honestly, I'm not 100% sure. I think that is one you might want to check with legal counsel about. Josh, I don't know if you
I don't,
have any.
Kristen, do you have
I
any new
can
thoughts on
answer.
that
I
one?
can't. I'm not able to turn my camera on, but
Oh,
I can answer. So it does not specifically apply to community colleges, and I think that part of that is because it's typically adults at community colleges, so it's a slightly different policy of the legislature. There are some issues potentially with privacy rights. California has a privacy right in its constitution, so I would not automatically just report to community colleges. I would check in with legal counsel before doing so, because this is a carve out to those privacy rights for the employees that are listed here, including at private schools, but we don't have that same statutory carve out for community colleges. So I would not just automatically take that step. I would check with legal counsel first, and you do not have to, but if you would like to, then you should check with legal counsel.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Okay, another question. Will you provide templates on the facilities portion of the policy? I believe in Megan's discussion, which came after the question came in, on her discussion about 5142 safety and 7100 facilities master plan, that this would include that necessary language, which I think is what the question is asking. Megan, do you have something you wanted to add about that?
Nothing to add, but just confirming what you said.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks so much. All right. Next question. How can we find what CTC requires to be reported to them? What would those instances be that meets that level of needing to report to CTC? So again, remember this data system is not up and running yet. I am assuming once it's up and running, there'll be more clear direction to districts and county offices of what needs to be reported. But since it's an unknown still, I'm not sure that I have a good answer. I would recommend once that comes out, if there's not more clear direction, to check with your either CSBA's legal services. You could check in again with the policy department, or of course with your legal counsel. But hopefully there'll be more information forthcoming when the system is set up. Next question says, would this apply to PTA events not during school time, but maybe on school campus? I'm not sure what this is referring to. Megan, do you recall, based on your talk, about what that might be
I
referring
believe in
to?
the context of mandated reporter requirements.
Yeah, I think it's for asking about whether these would be considered volunteers and subject to the mandated reporter requirements. And I am not sure about that. I would say double check with your legal counsel, especially if it's outside of the school day. Um, I would double check with your legal counsel about that. But
Yeah, typically
Kristen.
mandated reporters have to report when they are within the scope of their employment, and because the factual circumstances for something like a PTA on school grounds could be so different depending on district, this is a good time to reach out to your legal counsel about specifics.
Thanks. And Kristen, I think your input on this next question could be good too, because I know we talked about it when we were actually discussing the policies. In an election year, do newly elected board members need to be trained? So this is, I'm assuming, the mandated reporter training within 6 weeks of taking office or within 6 weeks of first interaction with students. And I know we had talked about this a little bit, so maybe you could provide your insight.
I don't think there's any interaction with student component. I would just assume that board members have to receive the training.
Yeah, and I just want to add that the code requires that districts develop a process for all persons who are required to receive the training to provide proof of completing the training within the first 6 weeks of each school year, within the first 6 weeks of that person's employment, or within 6 weeks of commencing volunteer services. So that's what the code says. If there's any ambiguity or gray area, I would again double check with a legal counsel.
Okay, thank you both. I saw your slide about ARs for 112 and for 212 are not double coded. Are we required to keep all double and triple coded BPs ARs, or we can keep just one? This came up at a meeting that we recently had with staff. So it is important, especially when they're not double or triple coded, to keep each one, because when it's not double or triple coded, each one, think of each one as its own policy, not even related to the other one. Like, even imagine that it had a different name, even though it doesn't. So if it's not double or triple coded, it's very important to have each one. I believe the way they're put into Assembly, even when it is double or triple coded, I believe there is a separate one for each category of staff. But if you have one, I would just title it. So if you're only going to keep like one document and it's a double or triple coded one, I would title it with the 2 or 3 different numbers. And then I think it's efficient to keep just one. But I would definitely title it then. So in other words, like, let's look at criminal record check, which is the slide that's up. It says for 112.5, for 212.5, for 312.5. If you're just going to keep it as one document rather than 3 documents, make sure the title shows that it shows the 3 different numbers. Okay, next slide. Next question. Why are you not discussing BP for 119.24 and boundaries for SB 848? Is it important for, yes, it is. And we actually updated that policy in February as part of our February packet. Meghan, did you want to add to that?
No, just wanted to say that in February, we actually updated both for 119.21 professional standards and for 119.24, which is maintaining appropriate adult-student interactions. And those were updated to reflect the boundary requirements, and that 4119.24 is included on the mandate list. And those both address the SB 848 requirements, but they were part of the February packet.
Thanks, Meghan. Yeah. And we will, so this next question kind of runs into that. Do all the BPARs listed on the question slide need to be adopted by July 1, 2026, or is it just 5142 and 7110? I think we have minimized it. We've tried to put the bulk of the material in certain policies. So I believe in terms of the facilities, it was 5142. And I believe for the other one about boundaries, it is the 4119.24, which we updated in February. Meghan, did I get that right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. So I don't see any other questions. So I think we can keep moving along next to student disturbances. So if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit, and we can go to the next slide, about BPAR 5131.4 student disturbances. And we'll start, as we usually do, with some considerations and principles. We know that it's important to ensure that schools provide a positive school environment and are conducive to learning. We recognize that student disturbances interfere with such an environment and interrupt learning. The third one is a tricky one. It's important to distinguish between student disturbance and student expression. This is not an easy distinction at times, as we all know. And the last is that it's important to have a plan in place to determine the difference and to know how to respond to and respond to when a student disturbance occurs, and possibly, hopefully, how to prevent it from occurring, to catch it before it turns into a disturbance. Next slide, please. So in terms of the policy itself, we amended the board's philosophical statement to basically recognize what we just talked about in the foundational principles. about that student disturbances do interfere with a positive school climate and interrupt learning. We deleted material relating to requesting assistance from law enforcement, not to delete that ability, but that material is covered in the development of a school's disturbance management plan, which we formally called a disturbance plan. And the reason for the name change is that we were recognizing in the writing process that how important the prevention aspect is, and that if we just call it a response plan, that's not really, it sounds like responding more to a disturbance once it has happened. So we wanted a management plan we felt was a good name. Maybe your district or county office will come up with a better name than we did. And of course, you can change that on your own. But we wanted it to be a more general approach where there could also be a preventive aspect to it. In the policy, we did expand material related to this management plan that I just spoke about, including who the superintendent or designee may consult with when developing the plan. We included a list of items that the plan may include, in which could be the types of student disturbances the plan addresses, measures to prevent the student disturbances, a school's response to student disturbances, and staff involvement. We also updated the policy to provide that discipline for students who participate in a disturbance may be in accordance with specified discipline-related policies. Next slide, please. So we did update the regulation too. We deleted unnecessary headings. We reorganized and clarified the list of prohibited activities for which a student involved or attempting to be involved with may subject that student to discipline. These three main areas are disturbing the peace, disrupting operations, and interfering with or unauthorized use of technology. The disrupting operations one is where we do have a list within that category. And this is where you would find the more current issues, really, that colleges and university campuses have been facing with sit-ins and walkouts. And I know a bit to districts and county offices of education too. We did also update the regulation to include the requirement, and it's a legal requirement, that middle or high school students be permitted one excused absence per school year due to participation in a civic or political event. All right, next slide, please. I think we are ready for questions on student disturbances. I don't see any yet. Josh, are you seeing any questions coming in?
No, not yet.
Okay, well, why don't we, if we don't see any, why don't we keep moving along, and we can always address those at the end, our end Q&A. And then I will introduce you to talk about Division of Governance responsibilities.
All right, thank you, Barbara. So we updated two related policies, one about the superintendent responsibilities and one about board member responsibilities. As we talked about early on, superintendent policies tend to be in the 2000s, and the 9000s are the board bylaws. So in general, there is actually a question that will maybe respond as part of this. The division of responsibilities between the board and the superintendent is a critical component of how you structure a governance team and do governance work. Typically, although you might hear different ways of thinking about it and sort of framing it, the board is responsible for the what and the superintendent responsible for the how. It's also just sort of policy versus regulation. The board sets the vision for the district. The superintendent implements that vision. So those are varying ways to think about the division of labor. And then sort of you drill down further within a board. So an individual board member has very limited responsibilities and almost no authority as an individual board member. The board typically acts as a collective body, and this policy that we'll get to is all about sort of what those limits are. And then, of course, one of the ways in which individual board members are expected to sort of serve the district is to do community engagement, to interact with constituents, to interact with families, to get a sense of what the collective need is, so that that can be reflected upon the election, on the board. So the update to BP 2110 was not that great. It was an expansion of the philosophical statement in this area, and it reflected SB 827, which talked about the superintendent needing training on ethics, every couple of years, and the timing of it depends upon, when that superintendent began their service. And then on the board side, board bylaw 9200 did have more updates to it. There was some clarification about board expectations and how individual board members conduct themselves. There's a cross-reference to Board Bylaw 9000, which is the general bylaw around role of the board, and then 9005 around governance standards. And then we added some detail around the sort of limitations on authority of individual board members, particularly that an individual board member does not direct staff or represent the board unless there's a very specific authorization that said, the board as a whole says, you board member, you are responsible for this, or what have you. Um, Board members are not to be investigating, resolving, or otherwise sort of engaging with community members about complaints, personnel, student matters, legal issues. Certainly, you can say, thank you so much for the email or your concern. I forwarded on to the relevant individuals. But a complaint about a teacher, there is a whole process that's around that, or student to student matters, there's a whole process around that. Individual board members are not responsible and are not authorized to sort of look into that as if they were staff. Again, that is, the board says this is the process, and the superintendent implements that process. There is some language about, engaging with community members and community engagement, but it all has to be consistent with how you make public statements, Board Bylaw 9010, and Electronic Communications Board Bylaw 9012. And then there was some text in the existing board bylaw that related to visiting classrooms, particularly when the board member is parent or guardian of a kid in that classroom. So, you take off your board member hat, you put your parent hat on. However, you really can never take off your board member hat, no matter what. And so you have to be very aware that even when you enter a school as a parent, you are still going to be seen by some as a board member. And so how to navigate that can be tricky, particularly if you have a concern or a complaint, right? Is it a board member complaining? Is it a parent complaining, etc.? I will say as an aside that I have seen some families when there are multiple parent guardians in the family, that is just the non-board member that sort of interacts in that role to ensure that things are very clear, for support of the student and the role of the board member parent. That's not in the board bylaw, but just as sort of an anecdotal aside, I've seen that, utilized in practice. All right. I think that's it. Just taking a look at questions. So there are no policies found in Gamut in the 2000s. So it may be because most county offices of education, the county superintendent is elected. You're not going to see the 2000s in the county COE set of policies, but they do exist in the district versions. And for those few COEs where the superintendent is hired by the board, you can use those sort of district version 2000s as your starting point and adopt those for your 2000s. I don't see any other questions, but if they come in, I'll add them. Okay, what is the best practice for updating bylaws? We have a board sub policy. We have a policy subcommittee with a focus on updating board policy. So it's just a terminology. Board bylaws are a subset of board policies. They're just the 9000s. So in most districts that do have a policy subcommittee, they also handle updates to board bylaws. There's no, I mean, I guess in theory you could have a separate one just for bylaws, but I've not seen that in practice anywhere. And I think it is very appropriate for the policy subcommittee to also be the subcommittee that looks at changes to board bylaws. And there's a question, can boards still waive second readings? So, it really is, you should look at your policy about board policies. What is your process? Do you have a policy on adopting policies? And then you have to follow policy. If that policy says you can waive second reading, then you can waive second reading. So if you can waive it only for certain types of policies, then you can only waive it for certain types of policies. It really is sort of whatever your process is. And if your policy adoption process is not written down, I suggest that you write it down so that you know what to follow. So it's not sort of an ad hoc, just sort of whatever the individual board president or what have you feels is the right approach. Um, Hopefully that
And
was
Josh,
helpful.
we do have a policy on that. I mean, a board bylaw called board
We do.
policies. I can't recall the number right now, but if they wanted to look at
Yeah.
that policy, they
We
could do
we've
that.
updated it in the last year, I believe.
Hmm.
And it does have some language around the policy adoption process, but given that that is one of the more varied aspects and is not a specifically required by law process, you should take a look at it and make sure that it reflects the process that you want for your district. And I think that's it.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you. Yep.
sorry. What prompted the creation of the policies on soup board authority? So
Josh,
if
I
I may understand,
wonder,
like,
yeah, I
yeah,
wonder if it's about the 4,000s being called for county offices being called a superintendent policy rather than a
I
board policy.
I
Um,
interpret it as just why do we have policies about the soup authority and the board authority? Yeah. So
okay.
um, thank you, Kim, for adding that. So you want to establish as a board what the scope of everyone's authority and responsibility is, so that it is clear who is responsible for doing what. That is true in any organization, but particularly true in a situation where you have a governing board and a superintendent. And so, whether it can be done through retreat, right? You can hire consultants, but wherever you land, right, it is advisable to write that down somewhere so you can refer back to it and it can be a guiding set of documents on how you govern. Without that, it can sort of vary depending upon the personalities, conflicts, topics, what have you. And in general, it's a process that needs specificity. So those are the motivations for why we have policies in this area. And Donald, if I didn't answer your question properly, just put a revised version in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to answer it at another time. Okay, Barbara, back to you.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Josh. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a list of the policies that are not covered in the webinar. As Dustin had expressed at the beginning of our presentation, we're going to just skip through the slides, but as Dustin suggested, if you have want to take a look at an explanation for them, you will be getting this copy, a recording of the webinar, and you will be able to take a look as well as a copy of the slide deck. So, okay, so Josh, I think we can just skip through the policies that are not covered and move on to, okay, we're going through them and you can see them all.
And while we're doing this, there was a revised
Mhm.
question. So, um, what motivated the policy changes that we made? So the the policy changes we made to the superintendent policy and the board bylaw, those are motivated by the superintendent one had a change in law, the Senate bill that we referenced, and the board bylaw hadn't been updated for some time, and there were some other changes that we felt it was timely, but it wasn't a specific court case or law change that motivated it. We just want to make sure that we keep all of our policies, when possible, up to date. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
Barbara,
you,
back to
Josh.
you.
Okay, so almost time for some additional questions, but a couple more things we're going to get done. Josh, can you please forward to the next slide?
Yep.
So
And just to
again, and I
clarify,
know
there are a few more questions, and as soon as we do this evaluation poll, we will have a few more minutes
we'll
to
get
get to
to
those other questions.
correct. Yes, thank you, Josh. Okay, so how would you rate the webinars? You know, we ask this because we try to always improve, and please, If you have a comment to make, please send it in. In fact, you probably recognize from this webinar that we are trying to be sensitive to and respond to the comments that you give. Okay, so how would you rate this webinar? 5 incredible, 4 really helpful, 3 good enough, 2 barely okay, or not 1 not worth my time? We'll give just a few seconds. Think another second or two, and then we'll bring up the results.
We still got we got responses coming in.
Okay.
So once things slow down, I will end the poll and then I'll publish.
Sounds great. Okay, so it looks like the majority felt it was really helpful. So that's great. The worst, we do have about 10% felt good enough, a little bit higher than 10%, 11%. And then some at the very top, 14% saying incredible. So that's great. Again, please send in any comments you would like because we're always looking to improve. All right, next slide, please. And I think this is where we have time for some additional questions, which we do have. Okay, so the first one is which policies need to be updated by July 1? So we did talk a little bit about weather safety does, and we talked, and that's related to one statute in one bill. And then we did talk about that 5142 safety as well as, let me get the right number. I don't want to mess anything up. 4119.24 need to be updated by July 1. The best way of knowing is reviewing the guide sheet that Dustin mentioned at the beginning of the webinars. That would show dates that when policies need to be updated by, as well as the mandate list, especially if it's a mandate that is still forthcoming. We will have the date in there on the mandate list. So I hope that answers your question well enough. I don't know if any of my other peers know offhand of any other policies that need to be updated by that July 1 date. But in terms of what we spoke about today, I believe that covers it. Okay, next question says big picture clarification question. Policies are updated and approved by boards. The ARs and exhibits, are they the responsibility of the superintendent to ensure they've been updated and are being enforced, implemented? And yes. Well, in terms of the implementation, it could be the superintendent or designee. And even with keeping them updated, I assume it would be, it could be like assistant superintendent of human resources or a financer that might be helpful to the superintendent in keeping the regulation updated and implemented. But Josh, I don't know if you have anything to add, but that would be those are my thoughts.
I'll just add that, we do this workshop at AEC, the CSBA annual conference every year about sort of policy adoption. We typically ask, how many districts where, have it where the board adopts the ARs versus the BPs, and it really varies. Sometimes the board doesn't even know about the AR. Sometimes it's information, but not for, action. And sometimes the board actually adopts the ARs. When I was in a board, we didn't look at the ARs. We might have been aware of them, but it was really the responsibility of the superintendent. So I would just say whatever your practice is, to follow that. I've seen both, and there's pros and cons of each.
Thank you. All right, next question. How do these updates work if our district is in the middle of a full policy manual revision with CSBA? I would definitely ask the consultant who you're working with of how to make it work. I would say in general, but it's probably the advice they will give you, is to prioritize mandated policies and especially ones with upcoming dates that you might not have done yet. But best is to be in touch with the consultant you're working with and to ask them, but they're probably on top of it. Next question. For policies effective July 1, 2026, what is the recommendation for districts who may be facing time issues in getting them approved by July 1? Yeah, we kind of talked about this at the beginning. So two options, or maybe you could do them both together, is one to agendize them for your first meeting after that. So I'm assuming maybe in August, especially if you're taking the month of July off. And Josh had a very good idea that you can kind of, well, not really adopt it, but put it into practice with final adoption and ratification by the board at the next meeting. So I think either of those two, and I actually think combining them is probably the best idea. So, okay, on what date did board members become mandatory reporters? Well, I would need Megan. You can probably
I,
help with this. I
I
know,
can
or
answer,
Kristen,
Barbara.
okay.
So SB 848 became effective January 1st, 2026, and it is what expanded the definition of mandatory reporters to include board members as well as volunteers and contractors. So it was signed by the governor on October 7th. So it's brand new.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Okay, and I think this is our last question. Apologies if already answered. Recommendation on how to agendize deletions of policies. So yeah, we did talk about this a little bit, but if we're getting multiple questions, let's make sure everyone has a good understanding. So we would agendize them with the other policies we were discussing. And we would do it basically like we would do an adoption. We would, make a motion. We would make the motion to delete it, and then the board members would vote to delete. Josh brought up that it could be done as a consent item. Josh brought up a very good point that if you're deleting and approving two related at the same time, such as sun safety and weather safety, to do them together. And yeah, I think that covers it in terms of that question. But please feel free to let us know if you need further follow-up. All right, next slide, please. So thank you very much for coming. Remember, if you have any follow-up questions, you can always reach us at policy@csba.org. And just really appreciate all of your time. We hope you found it helpful and worthwhile, and look forward to seeing you next time.